Won't you join me?
Light up the sky.
I could have danced
Hey everyone, Chris here. So we decided to decorate this episode in 2 parts. So just wanted to let you know that this episode will be part 1 of Gone with the Wind. Part 2 will be coming out after Christmas. Hope you enjoy the episode because we had so much fun making it. Enjoy!
Hello everyone and welcome to That Old Gay Classic Cinema. I'm your host, Chris, and we are joined by Nathaniel, my co-host, and my best friend, Ashley Lopez, to discuss one of our favorite pivotal films, Gone with the Wind.
Hey, how exciting. Hello, everyone.
God, so exciting. So, Ashley, we always like to open up the floor to our guests and ask, what is your relationship with cinema or classic cinema in general?
Ooh, good question. First off, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it. I'm very excited to be on here. My relationship to cinema or classic cinema. So probably starts from when I was younger, and I can't pinpoint a specific film or age where it just kind of became like light bulb moment. But it just was something that was always there, and obviously always like a comfort depending on your mood or what was going on. Definitely heavily influenced by my father, for sure. Not only because he loves history, and so that was also shared with me through films and other kind of mediums, but also because he really had a good array of different types of films at different points of the timeline. So it wasn't just like whatever the newest film was at that time. It also spans back to different types of movies with different backgrounds. He even has some foreign films. So I always picked from his library. So that's how I was first introduced to it. Obviously, going to the movies also was a regular habit with friends and family. But definitely that's what first got me interested in it, was within his library, which most of it were action historical war movies, but there was some nicer different types of films sprinkled in. And my mom specifically always had a love for Gone with the Wind. So that was actually introduced to me probably before it should have been, but but it was something that I grew up watching. She grew up watching it as well. So like, I think a lot of whatever my parents loved growing up, especially them growing up in like the 50s and 60s, that was passed down from them to me. And so I never really knew that was kind of rare when I grew up, that most people were like, oh, you're watching old movies. I was like, but they're good. And Old Yeller particularly stands out to me, and I don't know why, but I definitely obsessed with that movie when I was growing up. So tragic, though.
Very tragic. No, Ma. Yeller's my dog. I'll do it.
I always think of that friend scene when Phoebe hasn't seen the ending of Old Yeller. And,
That's always nice when like I feel like classic cinema, like this is like an area that brings families together because it's like kind of across the generations, and there will come a point in time in which the movies that we went to go see at the theater will probably be considered classic cinema, believe it or not, and then that'll be a
That's
weird
scary to
transition when
think
that
about.
Yeah, I'm
starts to
not ready for
happen. I'm
that.
still recovering from when someone online said, like, oh, I got this vintage thing from the early 90s. And I was like, oh my God, I broke a hip. I'm like, nope, not ready for that yet. So, but yeah, so it sounds like for you, Ashley, like classic cinema was really just one of the ways that you could connect to your parents, and like you were able to share these things with them, and you got to see the things that brought them joy as children and growing up, and they got to kind of have that exciting moment of introducing it to you. So that's wonderful. That's lovely.
Definitely, especially with both my parents, but more specifically, I know I talked about my dad introducing it to me, but for my mom, it was a way for us to bond because she didn't growing up, and I know Christian, you know this, but growing up, she didn't have the same level of education as me. So it wasn't something where like I grew up with my father telling me stories or creating stories together, reading to me, but with her, she couldn't share that with me. So she would jump in and watch movies with me. And that's how she would kind of pass down teachings, pass down advice, or just have fun without having to contextualize it using like books or from reading from things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that your parents had introduced you to Gone with the Wind. Was that your mom, your dad, both of them?
My mom, for sure. Definitely less of, he's not a romance type of connoisseur. From a history standpoint, if there had been no romance and just about the Civil War, definitely would have covered it.
Gotcha, good. Chris, how did you become affiliated with Gone with the Wind? What's your connection with the movie?
That's a very interesting story to tell because it was actually when I was very very young, and we went to a family party, and I was the one who was designated to put all the coats in, our coats in the room, wherever the room was to put the coats in, and I saw that one of my family members had a TV stand, and on the sides there were these VHS films. So I go through them. I'm like, okay, let's see what this person has, because whenever I see films, it's like, oh, that's interesting to me. So I remember I was just scanning through them, and I remember seeing this huge font on the side letter, and that's like Gone with the Wind. I'm like, what is this supposed to be? So I take it out, and on the front cover I see Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable, and then at the very bottom I see Vivien Leigh running across the lawn in her billowing dress. I'm like, this is interesting. I would like to know more about this film. And then years pass, and I never think about that film ever again until my senior or junior year of high school. And I remember the TCM, Turner Classic Movies, was giving a showing at 8:00 at night. So I recorded it. And then the next night I sat down and I watched the entire thing for 3 hours. And I don't know where the time went, because from the opening notes of the overture, I was just enthralled. Yeah.
Very cool. It is a very theatrical experience, especially with like the overture and the intermission, and it really does kind of set the scene for the scope of the movie, I find. So awesome. I came to it much later, I feel like. I had like obviously heard it referenced in popular culture because I feel like there's just like certain lines from the movie that always get quoted. But I became affiliated with it when I was a sophomore in high school, because the book was on the summer reading list, because the focus of that year, I believe, was American literature. So like I like had heard the title and I was like, oh, like there's the movie and the movie's really famous, so maybe I'll read the book and then I'll watch the movie. And I did, and I read the book, and then I definitely watched it. I think it was with my dad for the first time I saw it, because he's usually on board when I want to watch an older movie. So I saw the movie, and again, it was just the scope of it that surprised me. Like, again, it being 4 hours long, and then really kind of this epic story. And I know that when we were talking and preparing for the episode, we were talking about how this is a kind of like one of the contenders, I think, for what we would consider the American epic. Just because of its length, just because of its scope and the time frame it covers in the movie and in the book especially. So so I came to it at that point, and I think I was just blown away by the filmmaking of it. Like, it really is a quality piece of technical filmmaking. So that's my connection to it. That's how I came along to it.
What were your guys's? I'm turning the tables and asking you questions. I guess, what were your first impressions from what you can remember of the different times that you first were introduced, or maybe first really understood it? Because I know, like, for me, watching it at such a young age, obviously the societal problems and even problems with the war just kind of glazed over me, because it just wasn't something that I could receive at that age. So just costumes, color, music, that was kind of my first impressions. It wasn't until I got older and watched it and absorbed it where I understood the deeper layers that there were to it.
So I think I was a little bit more aware because I was older when I saw it, and my background, like, I'm white, I'm a northerner, a Yankee, as they would probably call me in the movie. So a lot of the cultural aspects of it were very shocking to me, especially as I was reading the book and watching the film, and I was like, oh, like, this is odd. It's odd to see slavery depicted in this way in a film. It's odd to see, like, again, just the way that it kind of tackles the race issue at the time, and also just the Southern culture, and very kind of counteractive to the view of the Civil War that I had been raised with. Because again, like, I'm in the North, so Civil War is always kind of painted as like, well, Southerners were upset that they were trying to come for slavery and making it illegal, so that's why they decided to secede. And it was always kind of very painted black and white of like, this was wrong, however, they were in the wrong and they tried to leave, and kind of getting cast as like the villains of the war, or like kind of, again, like they were in the wrong because also like the North won, the Union won. So this was kind of my first exposure to like this other kind of perspective of it for me. And so like that was always kind of very clear to me, and just obviously presencing that was my experience with it. Chris, what about you? When did you become aware of the full scope of it?
Well, it wasn't until I was much older again that I really wasn't fully comprehending what I was watching at that time. I just knew that I was just very, very taken with the whole scope of the film itself. I remember feeling, when I first watched, I remember feeling very enthralled by it. I really wasn't sure what was happening, but at the same time, I wanted to be a part of that film. I wanted to be a part of the knowledge of knowing what the techniques were into how the actors did what they did, how the score was set up, how the score was made, what were the reactions of test audiences before this whole before the film ever was released nationwide. And it wasn't until much later that I got the special edition pack of the film that I actually went in and I dug into the 2-hour-long making of narrated by Christopher Plummer, the whole 9 yards of understanding what goes into making a film of this precedence. But watching this film again, as I did a few days ago and last week, it brought to mind a lot of knowledge that we have now as an audience and what we can take away from it and how that can transfer into a queer lens in a way. I've really found the story of Scarlet captivating. I found their depiction of slavery very fairy tale-esque, because it doesn't seem like they're really taking this slavery issue seriously. They just seem like they're like nannies in a way. It's like you don't have them chained up to chattel. You don't have them being beaten and whipped head to toe. It's a very like fairy tale-esque. It's very, there's no other word for it. It's cinematic. And they just wanted their audience to escape in it and not question what they were trying to portray in that film.
Yeah. And there's a reason too that I noticed this because I rented to watch the film on Amazon, and they've added a slide at the beginning of the movie of just like the heads up, like this film is a product of its time. It is based on kind of the attitudes people had at this point in history. We want to make sure that we are preserving cinema. Like, we are going to show this as it was originally presented, and we're also going to be mindful of the context in which this was created. And it's like you said, Chris, like this is a very much a fantasy version of the South, because we also have to remember this was written by a white woman from the South who was basing this kind of on stories that her grandmother was telling her. So again, it's going to be a very specific experience, and it's also going to maybe be a more sanitized one. Although I would argue that the book is definitely darker than the movie in a lot of aspects. And the movie actually kind of sanitized it a little bit more, I think, to make it more palatable for audiences. But I want to go back to your point about it being kind of a queer story, Chris. So I think we've all kind of identified that the story of Scarlet, like, we can look at it through a queer lens. So I guess I want to turn it over to you two. Tell me a little bit about how you feel the queer narrative kind of fits into Scarlet's story.
I think because she, especially with the context of the war, like, so she's portrayed in different aspects, because you know how the film is like segmented for different parts of the time frame that it's covering. She's portrayed like almost 110% per each sector differently, with different like feminine, masculine, having to adopt both or put one aside for the other, depending on whatever the task at hand is. And through that, obviously, you see her character development, though she's not, perfect by the end of it, but has come a long way. But part of that not only being survival mode, but I think some of it you could attest to it just being part of her personality, and maybe the time in which the movie progressed, it was more acceptable, or she was allowed to kind of put that out there without having societal restrictions or restrictions on she's in a feminine glass box, right? So I thought what was interesting, which I didn't realize before I watched it, when I watched it with this lens kind of like on, I think there were things that came out like more so in the beginning, because I always feel like sometimes the beginning kind of just glazed over the film, and then a lot of it is devoted to developing like the war and then reconstruction. But I feel like I never really paid attention or gave much thought to things that were spoken, the script, or like characters, how they were pre-war. And I noticed for her, highly feminine, they always refer to her as a girl, not a woman at that age. But then it was, pushed on her to have to get married, and that was the only part of it. She's got this great feminine big ball gown that she's got to walk around in. And then they were taking naps like children, like the girls were taking naps upstairs while the guys were talking about the war. But she sneaks downstairs ultimately to get Ashley's attention, but she's overhearing all of their thoughts and opinions. And it's very clear in the beginning of the film, she's got her own. She's just very careful of what she says and who she's around. So she's like never really feels comfortable to be her true self, and just has to stay by societal norms at that time. until the war changed all of that. And then she has to adopt, she adopts more masculine attributes, but she still keeps her femininity. So I think in that sense, she's like very fluid in weaving both, even into the same scene. She weaves both attributes, like the way she talks to Rhett, not ladylike at all. And he even comments on that. And so she becomes like more assertive and aggressive, almost more masculine, but you know, she doesn't have to fit into one or the other. She's able to maintain kind of both by the end of it. And that's just part of her personality. I don't think it would have developed in that sense had the war not started and kind of changed all of those societal attributes and norms, what was accepted. So I feel like that's very similar behavior that a lot of people in a lot of different perspectives have, whether it's like cultural or ethnic or queer or anything like that of that sort. Definitely there's always societal norms that come into play where you feel restricted or that you have to pick a box, period, to stay in.
Yeah. And people really do like to put Scarlett into a box, especially in the beginning. And she definitely is trying to carve her own way in the world. And she's not dumb. She might be a little naive, but she's not dumb. And she understands the power that she has. And also, like, for context, she's a 16-year-old at the beginning of the movie. Like, she's supposed to be 16 years old. So kind of just becoming a young adult in this very hierarchical world. I definitely butchered that, but y'all know what I'm talking about, where it's like, obviously, not only do you have white folks and black folks occupying very different segments of society, but even amongst the individual groups themselves, there's even further divisions. Like you have Mammy talking about field hands versus house workers. You have again, Mammy too. She's kind of the main one to kind of call out the Slatteries as white trash. The Yankees, the Southerners. There is all of these groups that are existing, and Scarlett is obviously trying to be put into this box of the Southern Belle, the perfect Southern Belle, who is modest but also knows how to flirt. And you can see that she's rejecting some of that modesty in the beginning when she wants to wear the dress to the barbecue that shows her shoulders, shows her bosom, and all of the other women are covered from head to toe. She's the only one who you can see any sort of skin because she's wearing an evening gown, but wearing it in the afternoon. So kind of testing that. And I think she fits into kind of this being like the queer aspect of this story, I think, is ultimately her chasing after something that isn't actually going to make her happy. And for every queer person, I feel like there is that experience at one point in your life or another where you're trying to chase this idealized version of your life that other people may have wanted for you. Whether that be, again, like getting married, having the 2.5 kids, and obviously you're doing that with someone who is the opposite sex as you. And that's what she's doing through this whole movie. She's chasing after Ashley Wilkes, and people keep telling her, like, he's not going to make you happy. He's not going to make you happy. But she's really dead set on trying to make this happen. So I think it's especially this closeted queer experience of not wanting to accept what actually would make you happy. And for all intents and purposes, I don't think she would have been fully happy with Red Butler, but that'll come up later on as we talk about kind of the later scenes in the movie. But yeah, I think that's kind of the queer experience for me, is really Scarlett's chasing something that she thinks will make her happy, but then doesn't make her happy. Chris, what about you? Where do you kind of see the queer lens for this film, especially through Scarlett?
Well, given that this film takes place many in different sequential years throughout Scarlett's life, you know, you start it when she's young and then you end it. We're not really sure how old she is, but we're supposed to be.
I think it's 10 years. So like she's like 26, 28 at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it'd be like 4 for the war, I think.
Mm-hmm.
At least.
Right. So during those times, you see her kind of somewhat growing, but at the same time still trying to keep her childlike innocence. In a way, there are many instances where she's behaving like a child when she marries her first husband, and then she has to cry at her own wedding party, like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? I wanted to marry Ashley. And then her second husband, Frank Kennedy, who she stole from her sister because she just wanted money. She wanted security. She wanted to feel a part of society when society was dwindling during that time, and she wanted to revitalize it with the lumber mill industry. And then her last and final husband, Rhett Butler, I wasn't sure where she was going with him, but she just wanted another sense of security, to feel wanted. And that's what I think every queer person wants, in a way, to feel accepted, to feel wanted, to feel as if they matter to somebody else. And this film does a beautiful portrayal of seeing how far you can take it, how far it can take you down a certain road. And with Scarlett, she just goes down many different roads. It's a great example when she goes to Ashley's birthday party in that red dress, and that whole scene of looking like, yeah, I'm here. What do you think about me now? Like, that whole scene, I was watching it last night and I said, you know what? This is a very important queer element, because you can see how she's not taking shit from nobody. She's just there just to be the disaster part of the party. Like, she's like, yeah, you thought you could belittle me down, make fun of me. I'll show them what's what. And at first she was very upset about Rhett leaving her. She's like, nope. Rhett's like, no, you made this mess yourself. You're going to fix it up. You're going to play the part. And I think that's what the queer element that I find so riveting is that throughout time, throughout all of our lives, some of us are forced to wear masks that in some aspects we're not able to show people. We're not able to fully show ourselves to fully show ourselves as. We have to put on a front. We have to make people think that we don't care. We have to make people think that, oh, you don't matter to me, but I'm not going to let you see that. I'm going to let you see another side of me. There's no aspect of showing your true self. And that's what Scarlett, I believe that's the whole aspect of Scarlett's whole character arc, is to make the audience think that we're not supposed to care what she thinks. She's reflecting on what everybody else thinks about her at every given moment of the time during her life.
Because I think ultimately Scarlett her story is one of survival, and having to adapt and having to camouflage in order to be able to survive. And like early in the movie, after her first husband dies and she's in mourning, and she's like, I don't want to pretend. I'm tired of pretending. And she's having that
air quotes for mourning.
Yeah, big air quotes for mourning. Yeah. She's upset that she has to wear black. That she's mourning her loss of color. And she's just so tired of pretending, and she's just so emotional about it. And she has to pretend because she has to still survive in this society. And there's just so many aspects of this story. Like, this really, like, I think watching it now as like kind of a more fully formed adult, and just knowing what I know about trauma, every move that Scarlett makes in this movie makes perfect sense. Everything she does, every decision she makes, it really is the mindset of someone who has experienced trauma and has to survive after that trauma has occurred. Because she has lost everything. She has lost her house. She has lost her family as they once were. Her father's checked out. Her mother is dead. She has to rebuild after this. And again, presencing that she is a white woman who literally owns people. Like, she's not doing this by herself. She has people around her who are also helping her do that. it is still someone who is trying to survive in the way that they know how. And as a woman during that time, I'm reminded of Little Women, Florence Pugh, in the most recent adaptation, her speech to Laurie about, I am a woman, marriage is absolutely a business proposition. This is not about love. I need to survive. I need to eat, because whatever I get becomes my husband's. So I can't mess this up. So yeah, I am going to marry Mr. Kennedy because I can get access to his store. And I'm smart enough to run it. And I can do it. And I know I can't do it without a man. Otherwise, I get ostracized like Belle Watling. Because Belle is that ultimate quintessential of what happens if you go too far outside the norm. And Scarlett could have easily become Belle under different circumstances. So it really is, her story is one of survival. And I'm not saying that she's doing this in a healthy way or an effective way. She's doing it to survive, though. And that's the rationale we have to look at her through all of the choices she's making.
It's funny that you mentioned Belle Watling, because I wanted to shed a light on her for a minute, because as I was watching this film again, there's just so much that you can take away from her character, especially in a queer aspect, in a queer lens. When you look at when we're first introduced to her, she's in this big taffeta pink outfit, and it just reminds me a little bit of Glinda, in a way.
I do get Glinda vibes from her. I don't know if it's the color of her hair or the pink, or like I get some
outfits. It's very big, it's very bold, it's very, here I am, look at me, I don't give a fuck what you think about me, think what you want, I'm not going anywhere. And at the end of the film, when we see Rhett in seclusion and he goes to her for a consolement, after he leaves, you could see tears streaming down her face, because you know that she's put her child in front of herself for a few times, but at the same time she's trying to bolster herself up while trying to maintain that relationship with her child. And she understands what it's like to lose a child, and she's lost her child in a way, but she's also trying to, I believe, she has an arc where she would like to reconnect with her child and just say, let's try to make this work. There's just so many aspects of this film that you can just break away, which I kind of want to do. But
I feel like Ashley's another one too, because his attitudes, his opinions, though he's not afraid to say them, he does seem a little, not shy, but like reserved in that like cautious survivor sense of like, maybe I know the right people that I can mention a little bit of this to, but I know I can't go so far. So like the scene I mentioned that Scarlett's eavesdropping, when all the men are talking about the impending war, and like most of them are very excited and like they want to get out there, they want to blow stuff up, they want to kill, and they think it's going to be over very quickly. Obviously, he's of the most uncommon opposite opinion of, I don't really think that that's probably a smart game plan, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. And he's not mentioning anything that is outrageous, because most of us in a modern sense would say, yeah, that's a normal rationale, I would feel the same. But to them, they, at one point, one of them, I think it was Charles, he was even like are you shouting treason, or like almost at that line of like, okay. And then he realized like, nope, gotta shut my mouth, because he's, I feel like, a very soft spoken, also the way he talks and his tone, very different than the behavior of a lot of other men that are a lot more assertive or aggressive or like matter of fact. And I mean, he states that as one of the most important reasons as to why him and Scarlett would never work, and that he would never make her fully happy. And that's why he wanted to marry Mel, because they were of the same soft-spoken nature, reserved, peaceful nature. And that's just so far different than what they thought, what a man should be in that time frame, especially a man that's going to war. And though I think really, if he had the choice, even if the war was going to happen, he wouldn't want to fight if given that choice. But I think he knew that as a man in that society at that time, especially in the South, the only way that you could stay honorable is if you go fight. And if not, one, you're a deserter if you try to leave and they'll kill you. Or two, you might as well already be dead because you're going to be ostracized for the rest of your life. And so will your family, even post you dying. So I think he's one of those other characters that maybe doesn't get as the same arc, or I feel like maybe attention, at least in the film. I haven't read the book, so I can't say that. But at least in the film, he doesn't get that same, I feel like, full attention of, he maybe doesn't need as much time as Scarlet to do the arc, but he's not allowed to be his full self either, especially being a man in that time. Like, I know we often criticize like what being a woman is like in that time, or being obviously a slave, one of the worst position that you could be in that time. But I don't think it was, even being a white man, there were certain expectations and restrictions on that too, depending on what type of personality, professionalism, money, because he doesn't ultimately have that much money either. So I think that plays a part too of like maybe that queer perspective of like he's not what you would assume is the picturesque picture of like a Southern male at that time. I know he doesn't really, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he really states an opinion on slavery, but I know that they were very much like very kind and caring, him and Mel, when it comes to
He does, I believe, in the scene with the mill with Scarlet, he tries to call Scarlet out for using convict labor.
That's right.
And she says, well, you had no problem when you owned slaves. And he says, I would have freed them once my father died. If the war hadn't come already, I was planning on freeing them. So
there we go.
He does have this, and he was also like, well, you're also mistreating them. At least we treated our enslaved people. At least we treated them well. And It's also like, well, again, kind of that revisionist little bit of history of like, oh, well, people, like, we treated them well. They wanted to be there. Again, that very, like, I think that white perspective.
Dangerous,
of someone who owned enslaved people. So that's the closest I think we get to his hot take on slavery in America.
That's fair. I feel like that's in part to, like you said, like his general upbringing. It probably wouldn't have been fully accepted or fully for someone to fully imagine in that upbringing, like, yeah, we should just free them, period, and be fully passionate about it. I think that was very hard to do in that time sense, especially being a white male, because there's a lot of pressure to not, that you need them, one, and two, that's the way things should be. So, but yeah, I think he's a good perspective on that too.
And he also, like, I agree with what you said. I think he kind of goes against what we would typically think of as the quintessential male character, because he is very soft-spoken. He's very gentlemanly, and they go out of their way several times in the films to talk about that. That's why Scarlet is so attracted to him, is because he is so different from the other men. He does have kind of a cool head, and he also presents as pretty effeminate. Like, throughout the movie, he's very, like, the tone of his voice, he's very slender, very very fair, especially when you compare him to Rhett Butler, who's like clearly supposed to be the opposite of him in every single way. He, like, again, like, he kind of steps out that traditional masculine role, and he does kind of go more into the effeminate, and he seems very out of place when he's kind of got that masculine energy. Like, even in that scene where he's pretending to be drunk like the rest of them, it's like, this ain't Ashley. Like, this, he's clearly not, like, this is not who he is. And when he's talking with the other men about the war, he does kind of want that, I just hope the Union lets us leave in peace. I hope that they just let us go. I hope that there's no war. I don't want to fight. Basically, without saying I don't want to fight. He's just, I think, trying to have a different perspective of, well, this could happen too. But yeah, no, he's an interesting take, because I also don't know if the film wants us to like Ashley or if the film doesn't want us to like Ashley. I think it depends on how you view. I think in part it's how you view Rhett Butler. I also think it's how you view Scarlett as well, like depending on your perspective you take. I don't know. I don't know what the film's goal is. I'm ambivalent. I'm kind of on the fence just because he doesn't really... I don't know. On this viewing, I couldn't really decide whether he was a character I liked or disliked. So I'm just going to play the Ashley card and I will be in the middle. The Ashley Wilkes card, not Ashley, our guest.
I appreciate, though, it's confusing. That's who I'm named after, but so maybe I should. But growing up, I think you're spot on with like, what does the film want us to think about each person? Because Rhett's on the front cover with Scarlett. So it's like immediately you're like, I'm rooting for you two. Yes,
He must
work
be
it
the
out.
hero.
Yeah. And then Ashley's like, oh, you're a weenie. Or like, why are you so soft? That's how I thought when I was younger. And now I'm like, oh, that's horrible. The poor man just doesn't want to go to war. He's just a nice man.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of our favorite scenes.
I was about to, if that was my initiative, that was my yes, let's go.
Gotcha. So yeah, let's move on to talk about some of our favorite scenes. So we'll start with our guest Ashley. So Ashley, tell us, what is your favorite scene or scenes that really stand out to you in this movie when you're watching it that you're really excited to see on the screen?
I think some of my favorite scenes are definitely the ending stood out to me ever since I was younger. I feel like that's one of those that like is popularly referenced in pop culture or other movies, TV shows. And sometimes I think to that degree, you're like, is it really that good? Or is it just, it's been passed down for so long, it's kind of accepted. But I think even as I've gotten older, I think it's still a favorite. I think in a different way. So like when I was younger, I thought the ending, one, obviously was sad because I was rooting for them to stay together, and that's not what happened when Rhett finally tells her off. And then when I watched it as a teenager, I started like noticing like just character flaws in general. So things weren't so romanticized to me as I started to grow up and understand the deeper meanings of not only the political tone, racial tone, but just also just characters have flaws, and I don't have to like all of them or solidly hate any of them. And then I started to realize like, oh, Scarlett's so not a role model, and Rhett's not that fabulous either. But in that moment, he had every right to kind of just put her in her place in terms of, you gotta stop, lady. You gotta. Because nobody really
is all of a sudden realizing that Melanie Wilkes is truly the hero to Gone with the Wind and the person to aspire to be.
Honestly, because and I think up until that point too, everyone like was in eggshells, like stepping around Scarlett. Things were always said behind her back. That was the true opinion of how they felt towards her, not necessarily how she was all the time, but nobody would ever say that to her face. And I think in that moment was like, okay, you need to grow up a little bit. Like, you've been through some stuff, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people like crap all the time, especially because Rhett had his flaws, but, tried to help her grow up in a way. And I didn't see that when I was younger. So I thought that, especially like a man saying that to a woman in a film, especially from what I was used to watching with other classics, like that wasn't something that normally came up. Like, you could imagine like, okay, it was common, and I hate the word that it's common, but common for like, we see Scarlett slapping multiple people in the film. Okay. And it was like, yeah, like that's something that still happens in cinema. Like, you say something stupid, the woman's going to slap you, and we just accept it. And in that moment, it was like a verbal slap from a male to a female character. And so that always stood out to me of like, yeah, but just because you're a woman doesn't mean like you can also say and do whatever you want either, or threaten, or treat people like trash. Like, you're going to be told at some point you're not going to like it. And it just, to me, also, like, the whole marriage aspect too wasn't just like they were dating or they liked each other. They were married, they had a kid. So there's a lot of other things that played into it, but that's a heavy, I feel like, relationship arc, especially when you're at the time where you're starting to want or be interested in relationships. It's an important aspect to keep in mind of just treating people, one another, your partners, with respect. So I think that was truly pivotal for me. It's still one of my favorites. Obviously, the line is stellar. You can't do a better line than that. But I won't say it because I don't want to curse. But
I love that you presence that perspective, Ashley, of just because you've been through things doesn't mean you can treat people like crap. And I did, like, literally, as you said that was another connection that I made in my mind that's present in this film. And again, it really fits into that trauma survival narrative, because we can come out of trauma and we can grow and we can look back on it sometimes, and it sometimes makes us do things differently moving forward. Mm-hmm. We can also do the complete opposite, and we can treat people like crap because we've been treated like crap. Well, I've been hurt, so why can't other people get hurt? Or mm-hmm. why do I have to treat people kindly when I haven't been treated kindly? And in reality, like, when we have that perspective, it's not helpful. It doesn't really help the healing process. It just continues to inflict more pain. And I think that's what Scarlett does kind of towards the end of the movie, is she starts to drag people down with her.
Yep.
And because she's miserable, everyone else kind of has to be miserable as well. Rhett needs to be miserable. Melanie needs to be miserable. Ashley needs to be miserable. She is very focused on her own feelings. And I think it takes Melanie dying for her to realize that, oh crap, it's not all about me. There are other people in this. And I really did love her, and I really did care about her. And it's funny because we just watched a 4-hour-long movie in which you never actually said that to her. And
yeah,
it's interesting that it's coming out now. So I wanted just to shout out that I think that's a wonderful perspective to have, and that's a new one for me as well. Chris, your favorite scene in the movie, or scenes?
At first, growing up, I was always a fan of the getting ready for the barbecue scene when we see Scarlett getting ready. Honestly, I just wanted that dress, but because who doesn't want a big taffeta blue dress, a green dress that just, is frilled to the tons with different petticoats and laces and everything. But now, while I was watching the film, I guess my other favorite scene has to be the bazaar scene when after Rhett bids on Scarlett. And I do love me a good twirling in dresses scene, because I can't not look away, because anything can be fixed with a good twirl, and watching that whole scene, Rhett basically telling her, I'm gonna take you on dates. I'm gonna make you feel like the most important woman in the world. She's like, yeah, try, do it. I dare you, And then after he does all of these different, gives her these different gifts throughout that whole morning scenes, it goes to show how much Rhett honestly cared about her and how little she thought of him. She just said, oh, he's just another guy. He's just going to fly away. That's not going to stay in my life. And she wanted stability. And at that moment during the bazaar scene, she took her own name and she kind of showed everyone, yeah, you think I'm in mourning? Haha, I'll show you.
Again, her trying to kind of break out of that box society's trying to put her into, because they're in the Victorian era, which is peak mourning culture, and she would have had to have been in black for at least a year.
There is
we're also in the age of post Queen Victoria mourning Prince Albert. And she was in mourning for the rest of her life. And that was the case for a lot of widows where their husband would die and they were just in that for life. So for her to be at a party is shocking enough. Her dancing with a man, Aunt Pity Pat's reaction was completely justified for a woman at that time, needing her smelling salts and being passed out. So again, her just kind of breaking out of this box of like, what is mourning supposed to be and what is expected of me as a woman. It's a very fantastic scene just to see Scarlett reacting in that way and Rhett kind of coaxing her out of it. So, and I think a scene that stands out to me, a couple of scenes stand out to me. I agree with Ashley on the ending scene. That really stands out to me every time I watch the movie. And on this particular rewatch, I started paying close attention to Scarlett right after she walks out of Melanie's room. And my eyes are just on Vivien Leigh for the remainder of the movie, because that's a turning point for her. And you kind of follow her on this journey of like these realizations that she's making. And then you start to see her world crumble again in this movie, because it crumbles a couple of times. Obviously, it crumbles when she gets back to Tara and she sees it completely torn up and looking very ragged. That's the first time her world collapses. This is the second time I would say her world collapses. And she's making these realizations. She says this line, "I've loved something that doesn't really exist." And that's a very poignant point for her. She's been chasing this dream. She's been chasing this hope. And she's finally realized, no, it's not going to make me happy, because this man doesn't love me after all. He's only been giving me the time of day because he's honorable. What have I done? I've wasted at least a decade of my life wanting this man who doesn't want me in the same way. He wanted this other woman. And she starts to unravel, and you can see her like desperately clinging to whatever she can salvage. She goes after Rhett. She's pleading with him. "I do love you. I do want to be with you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And he has that awesome comeback line of, "How childish are you to think that you can solve things with 'I'm sorry'?" It's just beautiful. It's beautifully acted by the two of them. Vivien Leigh really is a standout in this scene, just with like how she acts throughout it, how she acts with other people, how she acts by herself, walking back to the stairs. "I'll think about it tomorrow, but I have to think about it now." It's just a beautiful, beautiful ending scene. And the other scene that always stands out to me is the right before the intermission, that "As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again." Again, your eyes are just fixed on her for that entire sequence and just seeing what she's doing, and you can't take your eyes off of her because you just don't know what she's going to do. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know what she does, but you're with her on that journey of how is she going to respond to this. Her whole family is asking her, "Well, what do you want us to do about this? Like, I can't take care of these sick people and the baby. I can't milk the cow. I can't do this. Oh, well, let's ask Mrs. O'Hara about this." Mrs. O'Hara is dead. She doesn't really have an opinion on the matter anymore. And she's just in this state walking out to the field. And that's when she makes the conclusion of, okay, I've lost everything. Like, this trauma has happened. Either I can live or I can die. And I'm choosing to live. And there is that desperation that is there and that hope. And it's just, again, just a beautifully acted scene. So there's so much good acting in this film to analyze, but Vivien Leigh really is a standout, and you can see how she got this part, and you can see how she beat out literally the hundreds of women who auditioned to be in this movie to be Scarlett. So those are the ones that stand out to me.
You know, as I was watching the ending scene last night, I got a very Hitchcockian feel from it as she's running out in the mist and the fog. It felt very much like Vertigo in a way when they're walking up the church steps to the bell. And it felt very like as if we were viewing Scarlett's mind, but brought to life she's walking around in this mist. That's what she was describing to Red in her dream. After they got married, she's like, oh, I've just been running around in the mist and I can't find it. Can you help me find it? And that's what I think we're meant to see. Like, this is her dream come to life, her nightmare come to life. And I think that's really poignant for Vivien's acting to bring to a new light, because her way of portraying that whole, I'm lost, where's my home, where can I find it? It's a very introspecting thing to view as an actor, as a viewer, as an audience member. It just brings a whole new gravitas to the film when you're watching that scene, when it comes full circle to that whole finale scene, and that moment when she's running around and she can't find Red, and she's trying to find the one person who she thinks will stand by her, ends up leaving her.
Absolutely. And I think time plays such a big role in this film, and the concept of time, and how people use their time in the film, specifically Scarlett. I noticed when we're at the Wilkes' plantation, there's a card of a clock, and there's a quote on it: do not squander time, that is the stuff life is made of. And squandering time is something that Scarlett really does in the movie. She really loses a lot of time. Again, she's convinced that Red is the one she loves. How much time did she lose with Red? And how did she spend her time being married to Red? How did she spend her time doing all of these things? She wanted something that wasn't there. And she doesn't really heed that warning. I don't know if she makes the best use of her time. Like, yeah, she builds her business and she acquires all this wealth. And what does she have at the end of it? She still feels hollow. She still is missing that which she truly wants. And throughout the entire film, she keeps saying, I'll think about it tomorrow. Whenever something bad happens, I'll think about it tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. She never thinks about it. She never revisits it. She just goes from action to action to action without really thinking and reflecting. And at the end, it truly is, I think, the first time where she's making a more calculated decision. Everything else has kind of come natural to her. Even earlier in the film, like, she says something about, she has like this realization of like, oh, well, we'll plant more cotton. Cotton will skyrocket next year. And she makes these very business-minded decisions, or I'm going to buy the mill, or I'm going to go into the lumber business. And she does this almost instinctively without almost thinking about it. And now at the end of the film, she's genuinely confused about what she's going to do next. It's the first time it might be the first time, I don't have the script in front of me, where she's actually thinking about, well, what will I do next? What is going to be my next step? And she eventually reaches Tara, and it's like, I'll go back home. I'll take my time. I'll think about what I'll do, and I'll start over there. And now she's starting to reflect. Now she's starting to think about what's happened in the past. And again, it's just an interesting perspective to take about time. Ashley as well. I think he's the one who says the cause of living in the past is dying right in front of us. And he recognizes that it's time to move forward. Rhett realizes it's time to move forward. Everyone else has kind of accepted that, yeah, we need to do things differently. We can't just keep going on the way that things are. The people who refuse to accept it pretty much become irrelevant, or they end up dying. So, I don't know. I really do like how the film handles the concept of time and that theme kind of throughout the entire movie.
I think it also, to your point too, what you said earlier, Nate, like goes back to that like survival mode of just like, it's all reactive. You don't necessarily have time to plan. And so they don't have time to cope. They don't have time to, especially Scarlett, like, I don't have time to fall apart because all these people are falling apart around her. And I think that is another problem of like, when you look at like the servants and the slaves, like that's problematic of itself of like, they're in that way, it's like their own stupidity, or they don't know what to do. So they have to look to their masters for help. But in just the aspect of like Scarlett, she's just as frazzled. Like the mist is in and around her just as much as it is with everybody else. Cause obviously there's no guidebook for what's happening around them. There's no outline of like, well then just do this and that. She's also from that point, like with her education, I think her father probably with her, I feel like gave her a little more inside scope into things than he did with his other daughters, but she's not, trained to know what to do in this situation because she wasn't brought up as a man of like, here's how you review business matters and make smart business decisions. So she's got to do everything on the fly. So to her, I don't have time to fall apart. I don't have time to think about my feelings. I need to do what I need to do to survive. That kind of like you see her eyes, like, and this is purely Vivien, but her eyes, I feel like, are like so expressive in that, that like the switch has been flipped inside of her of like, I'm going to get through this and I don't care how I have to get through it. It's failure's not an option. So in that respect, in that determination, like that's, I think how she succeeds, and she's super confident in those decisions, which I think is another testament to her being super fluid. She gains that confidence that no one really instilled in her before, and certainly not from societal norms instilling that in a female's position. And she just, I think that's when her true personality comes out. And she does, just in that sense, like you said, she never pre-planned for really what her true happiness would lie, where that would come from. So in that aspect, she doesn't succeed in that. And like you said, by the end of it, yeah, she's got all this money. She's in a better position in society. She finally got the man that she thought she wanted, that she didn't for a while. She tried the mom thing. And even prior to, the daughter dying, she didn't really feel fulfilled at all with that. So she just goes back to her roots as far as like the time thing goes of like, well, when was I my happiest? At home in Tara. And so, but you see the determination come on her again on her face of like, that will be my happiness, and that will be my pride in that sense. So I think another scene where that determination comes out, but it's in contrast because they're silhouetted, is if you notice the pregnancy with Mel, and she's having to go through that labor again, not knowing how the heck to do this because nobody's around to help her. The slave is, she had, and again, this problematic, said she had lied. She's like, I don't know why I lied. Yeah, probably because you were nervous and you didn't want to look stupid in front of her and get whipped for it, which either way she slaps her. And that was another like standout to me of like, whoa, I can't believe you just did that. Probably
because also Chrissy's supposed to be like 12. Like she's supposed to be like
Right.
a child.
Yes.
And they obviously aged her up for the film. So you're depending on a 12-year-old to be honest to you about A, how to give like birth to a baby, and B, not be scared or be willing to go
like a doctor.
Yeah.
So I feel like, but in that like her attitude, like when they silhouette them in the room and Mel's clearly in distress, which I feel like, God bless Mel, because that's not how I would be in that moment back then with no medication or whatsoever. But she's just like, oh, go ahead and scream. Nobody's here to hear you. I mean, like, that's amazing. You can just tell the tone. You don't even have to see her expression to know how determined she is of like, you're not going to die. The baby's not going to die. And I'm going to do this and it's going to happen. You're going to have this baby and you're going to be fine. And that to me, the tone and the way they decided to silhouette that in the background with the impending Yankee soldiers coming into town, I think that was genius.